Edinburg. How are you? Okay, where are you guys? How are you? Much, much better. We have an exciting panel for you this morning. Please welcome to the stage your moderator, national talk show host, Mr. George Noory. Let me hear it, guys.
Hello, good morning. What a great panel, huh? My boyhood idol is here, Mark Goddard. Mark, we're back in Los Angeles. We're dear friends with little Will Robinson, Billy Mooney.
He's grown up.
He has. He's got a band and a little music career going and everything else. I had him on Coast to Coast a few years ago, and the first thing he said was, "You're a bad, bad man," from the Twilight Zone. Let me do a little brief introduction. Lord, look at the crowd. I think the entire city of Edinburg is here. I know Ruben and Noe were asking where all of you have come from. Who's come from the farthest place? That's right.
I came from Alpha Centauri.
Yes, you did. By the way, Mark, my mother says hi. She's from Fitchburg, Massachusetts, right next to where you were born out there, right? Lowell, right?
Yeah, I was born in Lowell, but I never lived there. I want to be near my mom, so I was born there.
Well, okay. Well, let me introduce Mark Goddard real quickly. He doesn't need much of an introduction for you, but of course. Well known for the incredible television series Lost in Space. And after that series, he decided he wanted to be an agent. Why did you want to do that, Mark?
Well, it was either commit suicide or become an agent. And I thought I'd become an agent.
Good decision. And then he went back into acting again, and he's just a great guy. Mark Goddard, please.
Quick introductions, but I am proud, mostly proud of what I did when I left acting in 1989. I got my master's in special education, and I worked with kids with behavioral problems for 30 years.
Wow. Good for you. Good for you. Super. Are we going to have microphones for them? Can you hear them okay?
They're on the way.
Oh, they're on the way. Okay.
We can come up and cuddle around you.
Let's do that, Mark. Let's stall for a little bit, huh? David Carren. Here he is. Noted writer, Twilight Zone, Star Trek. He's won awards. One of his Star Trek episodes got just an incredible award for that too. And he has a mic. David, say hi to everybody.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Hello? Yay! Hey, we have sound. And of course, our friend Noe Torres. I'm Noory. Author, publisher, UFO investigator. His book, The Other Roswell, tells the story of the crash that occurred near Del Rio in 1955.
Thank you. I just want to thank you all for coming and showing such a great support. Some of the greatest moments in my life have been spent on the phone with George Noory, so I appreciate George being down in South Texas for the first time ever, George.
First time.
We love it. Thank you so much.
Now, you and Ruben had me in Del Rio last year, right?
That's correct, yes. We had a wonderful
How
time.
close was I to Edinburg?
Well, Del Rio is considered more West Texas, so it's, I'd say, 300 to 400 miles from here.
That's a poke.
Yeah, it's...
That is a poke. We're on the border now, aren't we? That's interesting. I invited Donald Trump to join us, but he's not going to make it. Our dear friend Ruben Uriarte is with us. Ruben, UFO investigator, member of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. Ruben, say hi to everybody.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for being here. We have a great show to present to you all, and yeah, I'm talking Texan now, huh? So we have a great show for you folks. Thank you.
And of course, Dr. David Bowles.
Thank you, thank you.
It's good to call David. I guess, could I characterize you as a science fiction writer?
I am. I write science fiction and fantasy, yeah.
And how did you get into that?
It's just one of those things where you grow up enjoying that genre writing, and I was always a big bookworm, and as I got older and did a major in English at the university here, and then my master's, there wasn't a whole lot else to do other than teach English and like write the great American novel. But I soon found the desire to go back to my childhood obsession with fantasy and science fiction, and began to write.
And you write well.
Thank you so much.
Dr. David Bowles, folks. The subject matter, of course, for this event is UFOs. And are we being visited? And what I want to do is get the views of our audience. One of them might not be a believer that we've been visited, which is going to be fascinating too. But Ruben, let's start with you. You've been investigating UFO cases, geez, almost all your life. To give us your thoughts on whether you think we're being visited or not.
Well, this became a part of my life when I had my first UFO sighting around age 8 to 9 years old. I lived in Oakland, California, and saw something very strange. And when I saw that, I thought it was a balloon, but obviously it wasn't, because it remained with me for the rest of my life, and it left an imprint with me. And then with that, I later joined MUFON and Mutual UFO Network, got together with a number of people, met folks who have had their own particular experiences. And every day, my email, I get tons of emails of sightings that we get reported to MUFON, happening all over the world. And it's amazing when you meet so many credible people like pilots, police officers, housewives, truck drivers, just people of all sorts from diverse, all sharing their experience. So I'm sure many of you out there have your own story or know somebody who've actually experienced something. And again, it's just a worldwide phenomena, and it's been affecting us all. So I believe definitely we're being surveyed.
You know, I had on Coast to Coast last week Paul Hellyer. Paul, of course, is the former Canadian Defense Minister. And he is a staunch believer that we're being visited, that we have been visited, and he saw some confidential information about that. And when you hear stories like that from those kinds of folks too, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut, walked on the moon, is 120% convinced that we're being visited. You got to wake up and say, oh my gosh, what's going on? Dr. David Bowles, tell us about your thoughts on this.
It takes a minute for this thing to warm up. I'm naturally a skeptic about nearly everything, but one of the interesting things about being a skeptic is it doesn't mean that you say no. It means that you have your mind opened, that you take in all the evidence, that you talk to people, you hear their stories, you begin to see patterns around the world going back, centuries of abductions and people trying to grapple with what it is that's happened to them, calling them fairies and elves, and then eventually maybe calling them demons at one point and calling them aliens. But clearly, when you look at these patterns, there's something going on with humanity that researchers need to continue looking into. And so, as somebody who was brought up with the kinds of stories we have here on the border of unexplained phenomenon, I always keep my mind open, and I'm always on the lookout for stronger and stronger evidence. And I know that one day, if something were ever happen to me, and I were to see something set down in front of me, my skepticism would evaporate very quickly. So I have my mind completely open to that, and enjoy talking with people and dialoguing about it.
Perfect. And Mark, of course, when you're doing the series Lost in Space, did you and the rest of the cast members talk a lot about extraterrestrial life?
That wasn't the question you asked them. Why do I get this? Oh, here's the
I'm
question.
going to have fun with this one today.
I hear the question and I'm ready to answer it, and then you throw me a curve.
Well,
I'll come right back to
these
that.
guys
No,
are
I was
that
just going to say something. I was just going to say that I never really believed there was extraterrestrial beings at all until I met Dr. Smith. Then I knew that there was something going on, you know. But and basically, to answer your question, yeah, in Lost in Space, we had people from all over the whatever out there, you know, come in visiting us, and some of them were okay. We had cowboys, we had hippies. It might as well be on Earth. We had everything like that, you know.
You did.
But as far as my personal feelings are, I'm open to the question. My doubt is that if they're there, why aren't they here? And maybe they are here. Oh, no,
Could be half of the audience.
are there anybody out there that's not supposed to be here? Okay, but anyway, no, it's a it's a phenomenon. It's great. It's great. It's very interesting, and I wish I knew more about Area 51 and this. And why do you get so many sightings down here in South Texas?
There's many, Ruben.
We don't get any in New England, except Tom Brady and his deflated footballs. That's all we get
That's
there.
what you've been seeing, the footballs flying.
Probably Tom's tune.
$43,000. Just sold the ball for $43,000.
And his cell phones.
Yes.
David, go ahead, your thoughts.
My perspective is filtered through Star Trek because I worked with Gene Roddenberry. And he famously, when he pitched the show to NBC, he said it was Wagon Train to the Stars. Because no one at that time had ever seen a continuing series with continuing characters and spaceships on television, except maybe back in the golden days or the live days, not in modern network TV. So you could only sell it because maybe a few of you here remember Wagon Train was actually the top #1 show on the air at that time.
That's right.
Now, what was Wagon Train, though? It wasn't just how he sold it. It was the message beneath that. Wagon Train was about people crossing the country, going to a completely new world to find a new life. And this is a very human endeavor. Joseph Campbell called it the hero's journey. We all have our journeys. We all have our hero's journey. I mean, mine went from Los Angeles to Houston to here, okay? And you don't want to know the details because it's frightening, okay? But we all have our journey. Even if we just cross town and go to a job in an insurance office, one way or another, we are going somewhere to experience a new thing to make our lives better. And I think all of this very much is what UFOs, aliens, is all about to us. You'll notice that whenever we encounter aliens, they're not just blobs, they're not silicon-based. Occasionally, of course, you know, there was an episode in Trek, the famous Silicon Monster. But basically, they're us. They represent the best and worst of us, and they represent the best and worst of our own journeys toward new lives, new experiences, new dangers. I think what was also something about Star Wars, we're going to be talking more about Star Wars, is Star Wars in its own way, and Star Trek very much, were utopian. The future will be better. The future will be brighter. The future will have a new hope. Okay? Whereas the vast majority of science fiction is dystopian. If you ever watch Walking Dead, I mean, I watch that show, I love it, and I hate watching it because terrible things happen every week. This is the thing, there's an element of that, even with terrible invasion stories like Independence Day. Well, they invade us, we'll get on their ships and we'll go out there. It's a very powerful human need to go forth, find new things, and build a new life from where we were. How could there be something more powerful than that to motivate stories and people? So we're never going to not have UFOs, science fiction, aliens. We need it. It's part of our psyche. And I'm all for it.
And Noe, you have made a career out of investigating this phenomenon.
Well, I'm actually, I haven't been in it as long as my buddy Ruben, but since I actually became involved in it when my mom had a very dramatic encounter in the 1940s, right here just west of Edinburg. And it's been documented in one of Brad Steiger's book, My Mom's Encounter. So she was out in the woods one night because there was a lot of commotion behind our house. We lived on North Sherry Road, for those of you that are from this area, North Sherry Road near 107. And suddenly there was this commotion and lights. She looked out one of the windows of our house and she saw this commotion going on in the back of the house. So I remember distinctly she used to tell me this story. I wasn't around yet, but she walked out the back door of the house and went partway into the trees. Trees were surrounding her. And suddenly she said it was like somebody turned a spotlight on, and she saw this illumination all around her. And she had 3 or 4 pet dogs. She said they suddenly came rushing from wherever they had been for the night, and they started circling her, jumping up into the air and snapping their jaws. She heard this loud mechanical noise from above her head, and there was this illumination, and then she told me that the leaves on the nearby trees were just blowing like a strong gust of wind in kind of a systemic flow. And but here's the thing that always got her, and she thought about it the rest of her life. Try as she might, she told me, it's as if my neck muscles were locked. I could not move my head up to see what it was that was above me. I could hear it, and of course she saw the effects of it around her, but she could not look up. So being a religious person, she got down on her knees right there on the ground. And she doesn't know, she doesn't have a sense, she told me she did not have a sense for how long this incident went on. But at some point later, she described it as somebody turning off a light switch. Suddenly the light went out, and at the exact same time, the dog stopped barking and became still, and they lay down beside her. And there was no more wind effect or anything. It was completely still. And unfortunately, she used to tell me this, she passed away in 1983, she used to tell me this when I was a small child, and I didn't know anything about UFOs at that point, so I didn't know to ask her, could there have been time that passed from the time you first saw this thing above your head until it finally went away? Could there have been some lost time there? But anyway, after she told me this story, I became so interested in the topic that I'd run to the public library and run to my school library and check out every book on UFOs. I remember, the classic works of the 60s. I grew up in the 60s. Frank Edwards and Brad Steiger and many, many other people writing about UFOs, sightings, and UFO incidents going on all over the country. So, but my mom's experience kind of put a dramatic exclamation point and got me started on this interest. Many years later, when I was writing books about Valley historical events, inspired by Brian Robertson, with whom I worked, I decided to write a book about local folklore, and I wanted to include a chapter about UFO sightings in the Valley. And it was at that time that I linked up with Ruben, because he was the only person that was speaking about a UFO crash case that happened not that far from here along the Texas border, which ended up being our book, Mexico's Roswell. So we published that in 2007, and ever since then I've been on, speaking engagements and TV and radio and so forth. So that's how I got into the phenomenon.
And you can't get out, can you, once you get in?
It's not easy. Sometimes I think like the Godfather thing, you can go in, but he won't let you out.
Not at all. My mother was the reason I got into this. She brought me home a book once by Walter Sullivan, who was the writer for the New York Times at the time, science writer, called We Are Not Alone. And I read that book, and I just was obsessed with it. And then Look magazine came out with The Interrupted Journey, the story of Barney and Betty Hill and their abduction case. When I was 21 years old and a radio reporter in Detroit, One of my interviews was with their psychiatrist, Dr. Benjamin Simon, out of Boston. And I asked him specifically, as I was interviewing him, were they telling the truth about their abduction case? And he said, yes, they were telling the truth. He said, let me qualify it. I don't know what happened to them. I don't know if they were abducted or not. But under hypnosis, separately, both of them told me the same story. How they saw this craft, how they saw these beings coming to them, getting them, taking them to their craft, testing them, probing them. He said, they're not lying. Whatever happened to them, and he said, I don't know what it was. Whatever happened to them, they believe it to be the truth. And he said, and that's as far as I can go with them. That was an amazing story, too. Show of hands. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. How many of you believe that there is intelligent life out there on other planetary systems in the universe? How many of you believe, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. Put them down if whatever your answer is. How many of you believe that they're visiting us here? Wow. Only a few hands went down. That's amazing. All right, stand up now and jump. Simon says. Something's going on. You know, as I've interviewed scientists and physicists, some are believers and some are not on Coast to Coast. They all seem to have one common denominator. That everything here is the same out there. The primordial soup that formed us, whatever that might be, let's take God out of the equation for just a moment, that it's the same. Other planetary systems, if you can find a planet that's close to its star, that has water, the chances are you're going to probably have life there. Now, has it developed into intelligent life like us? Are we intelligent, by the way?
Most of the time.
That, of course, is the unknown variable. Tom, you've got some questions, too, for the audience, and from the audience for us. Yes, you sure can, Mark.
I'm just curious about the, I'm curious about if it happened on Encounters or some artist's rendition of it, but why is it that it's always the green guy with the big eyes? I mean, you know, is that why? Where did that rendition come from? That the alien?
I had
Go ahead, David.
the gray. It came. Hello. Okay. It came from pre-war Pulp Fiction.
Interesting.
There were a series, especially Amazing and Science Fiction magazine, and 3 or 4 other long-forgotten periodicals. Right around the 30s, late 20s, early 30s, they had started to have these very lurid covers. If you look at these covers, you'll see, especially young women, because of course they were for teenage boys, these magazines. Young women being tied to tables with aliens with big bulbous heads, usually green with big eyes, standing over them. Then you would read the story and be disappointed because nothing would happen that you would put in a story. You know. But it started right about then. There was a lot of these, it was just appearing. Now, whether or not this was just something in the publishing world, it sold magazines, or there was some other cause, that's kind of when it started. That's where the imagery came from.
Now, the Betty and Barney Hill case of the 60s, now this was before that you were talking about.
This is in the 30s,
This
40s.
is way back.
It's pre-war.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's pre-war.
Because they talked about the alien grays and the big heads and the big eyes. Noe, go
I'd
ahead.
like to just add that we have found cave art and rock art from centuries ago that depict these strange beings, entities that look just like the Greys. So it's, you know, sometimes I think that it's something that's been in the subconscious of human beings for centuries. I mean, these shapes, these figures, these hulking little men with the large eyes, you see it in picture art, as I say, that's been found in etchings and drawings on caves from thousands of years ago. So, you know, there could be a modern iteration of it from the pulp magazines. Maybe there was some influence there, But I think it's something that comes from our past history. It's deep in our past. I really do.
Well, what I find out too is even the Vatican will admit that your belief in extraterrestrial life does not mean you don't believe in God, for example. And I mean, in those areas are pretty mind-boggling to me. And then they build a couple observatories. What are they looking for? Anyway. Tom, you've got some questions from the audience too.
Yeah,
Let's
good morning,
mix them in.
everybody. We'll start with Ruben.
By the way, producer Tom Danheiser from Coast to Coast. A little round of applause.
So, Ruben, we'll start with you. Please tell us one of your favorite UFO cases and what intrigues you most about it.
Give it a minute. Give it a moment. Yeah. Yeah, that's always a really good question because there's so many fascinating cases out there. But what comes off the top of my head was in 1995, I had the opportunity to go to Mexico, and I met with a young boy who shared with us, with our group, his story where both he and another small boy had an encounter with three beings on top of the volcano near Popocatépetl, which is the big volcano surrounding Mexico City. And he said that this being spoke with him telepathically, and again, this was in 1995 when I interviewed him. He said that his encounter with these beings was in 1993, and the being had like a small little beard like me, little chin hair, and
I always
big
wondered
eyes.
about you.
Yeah. Big shifty eyes, you know. And the being told the boy that there will be, that they were there to protect the volcano from erupting, and they were there to prevent the others from erupting the volcano, and that there will be a war in New York that will cause the entire world to go on alert. So when I heard the young boy, and I said, well, you know, I thought, well, maybe he's talking about the first attack against the World Trade Center. And he described the beings as having tight-fitting clothing and that. Well, when I heard his story, I was more focused on the description of these beings, and then later, of course, 2001, we had the 9/11 attack, and prior to that, there was a TV show called Strange Universe that went down and interviewed this boy. He was about 1996, 97, when he interviewed a boy, and he said the same thing, that there will be a war in New York. And this young boy he lacked education. He could not find New York on the map. So when the 9/11 attack began, and then I go back to his story, I was wondering, maybe, just maybe, these beings were foretelling a prophecy that came true. So that remains with me, and it's one of the interesting cases that I've had a chance to come across.
Go ahead, Tom.
David, was there something that happened in your childhood that sparked your interest in UFOs and the paranormal?
Oh, the other day.
Yes, excuse me.
Yeah, no, well, I guess the only thing that happened to me in my childhood, other than like just being told horrifyingly scary stories by my grandmother Garza when I was a little child, and threatened with La Mano Pachona, the demon hand, which she told me was waiting in the toilet for me. I don't know, why would she do that?
So that's where he hides.
Yes. I used to steal my cousin's cookies when she would be storytelling. I was the youngest one, and I would reach out and steal their cookies and eat them when they weren't looking.
Well, thank God you didn't have the squatty potty.
They would have been very close. So, but when I was 13 and we had just moved to Weslaco, I bugged my parents because they uprooted me from McAllen and moved me to Weslaco, and I was throwing a fit about it. And I had them turn the garage into a bedroom for me, and so I didn't have to be in the same bedroom with my brothers anymore. And so I was laying there in this very large garage in my bed and staying up really late, like 13-year-olds are wont to do. And as I slipped into sleep, because it's the garage and the laundry room is right there, and through the laundry room I can see there's the back door and I can see the backyard. I happened to turn my head, and there was sitting on a branch of the mesquite tree this very large barn owl. And those of you from the Rio Grande Valley know, and you've heard me talk about it this morning, that one of the stories from this area are stories of shape-shifting beings that can assume the form of animals. And the most common one is the lechuza, which is a being that can change into the form of a barn owl. A very large one because of the conservation of mass and energy and all that great stuff. So this huge owl is staring at me. And I've been told by my grandmother when I was a child that if a screech owl or barn owl happens to sit outside your window and is staring at you, you don't want to continue staring at it, and you really need to get away if you can, because if it flies away, you're safe. But if it opens its beak to screech at you, then it's over. It's coming for you and taking you away. So I reach out and shut the door so I don't have to see out the back door anymore, and I fall into an uneasy sleep. Well, around 3 o'clock in the morning, I feel like something's looking at me. I feel uneasy, and I wake up. And I turn over, and it's a converted garage. And so it's one of those garage doors that have those kind of smeary plexiglass windows set in it, right? And I look out, and on the ash tree in the front yard is the same barn owl. It has flown around the house and come to sit in the front to look at me again. Now, I mean, I don't know much about animal behavior, but that struck me as being something that an owl doesn't typically do. And so I got up, grabbed my pillow and my blanket, and rushed down the hallway to my brother's bedroom to lay on the floor. And they found me there in the morning, my two brothers, the younger brothers, and they made fun of me for a very long time. But it was, you know, I didn't want to risk. I had been raised to believe that something bad would happen to me if this thing screeched at me, and it made me feel like, wow, maybe these stories that my grandmother's been telling me are not just, you know, folk tales and nonsense. Maybe there's something else deeper about them. And so my fascination with these stories continued and deepened. And when I became a writer, not only do I mine them for science fiction and fantasy stories, but I also do research into them and write books about folk tales. So that's how that all got started.
That's amazing how when you're younger, how events can just shape your life and your career. And David, did you check and see those owl scratches on your back when you were little?
Yeah. Luckily for me, the owl did not get to me, but you know, if I had lain there for a little bit longer, it might have. The tradition is that it will break through the window and come for the child.
That's a scary story for a little kid.
And I was 4 years old when my grandmother told me that story. And she told.
Now I bet you loved your grandmother, but what the heck was wrong with her?
This was actually the tamest of the stories that she told us, George. And there are people in here who are from the Valley or from Mexico, and they know exactly what I'm talking about. And we ate that, yes, right?
That'd be a great open line story on Coast to Coast. We got to get you to call in.
David, I can relate to your story because when I was a kid, when I visited my family in Mexico, we had to use an outhouse, and so I was always throwing firecrackers first into the outhouse. I've seen it.
Evil, very evil.
Okay, Tom, what else do we have?
Hey, Mark, how are you? Did you have an interest in space before you got your role in Lost in Space?
Only to find a space to park my car at the Patriots games. Patriots games. I know you guys are all Dallas games. They're good. Dallas is fun.
I bet he was a handful on the set.
Oh, yeah. Listen, I never answered anything straight. What was the question? Did I have any interest in... No, I didn't. You see, when I went to Hollywood, I was a cowboy in Johnny Ringo. Then I was a detective with Robert Taylor in The Detectives. And then Lost in Space came along, and I said, I don't know, Lost in Space, I said to myself, I really want to be Paul Newman. I don't want to be Buck Rogers. So I wasn't sure I wanted to get involved, because I didn't know anything about space. I just wasn't interested in it. But since I did the show, and now later I'm interested in everything that has to do with space.
Let me follow up just real quick. What was it like to work with your friend Chuck Connors, the rifleman?
Chuck Connors was great. Chuck Connors, I love Chuck Connors for two reasons. One, because he was the rifleman, and that was a terrific show. Secondly, he was a Boston Celtic basketball player. Wow. And he played baseball for the Dodgers, so he was quite an athlete.
He was, yeah.
Yeah, and he became a good friend of mine. And we played golf together. He was left-handed. He wasn't a very good golfer. But he was great with a gun, so that's all that mattered, But to work with him, I have, you know, I am trying to sell my book. Okay. I have the space and back. I have space and back. Probably sell them out today. I sold quite a few last night. But in that book, it's a memoir. It's not particularly about Lost in Space. And the fans and people who wrote about it, like on Amazon, get great reviews, you know, 4.5 stars out of 5 and all that kind of stuff. And people said, we love the book, it's a great read, but there's not enough about Lost in Space. So now I'm writing a book, right now in the present, I'm writing a book called 3 Years Being Lost in Space. And it's all about Lost in Space. It's coming along very good. And so that's going to be a fun book. This one's a memoir, but I have a whole chapter on Lost in Space. I have a whole chapter about my career in Johnny Ringo, doing the Rifleman with Chuck Connors, and all the different kind of stories. So I just sold my book. Last one. Anyway, it's great to be here.
How about with a round of applause we invite Mark on Coast to Coast? Wouldn't he be a great guest? Would you do that?
Sure. You gonna fly me out for it?
Well, you can do it on the phone.
Oh, come on.
It's radio.
No, I know.
Do you get to Los Angeles much?
Yeah. No, I'll do a radio interview. I'd love to. Yeah, I do. I've done a lot of radio interviews, and I just sit back on my couch and...
It's a little show.
I'm very candid. You know, I'm very candid, and I say a lot of interesting things, and you know, I like to write about them. But as long as I'm appropriate and politically correct, I'll do it. I'm not too politically correct though. I'm more like Donald Trump than I am Bush. I'll tell you that.
We have a delay, so.
Yeah, but we don't want to keep hitting it. If we hit the delay more than he's on, something's wrong. I'd like to introduce you to Mark Goddard. What else you have there, Tommy?
David, what was it like to work with Gene Roddenberry, and what was your most memorable moment with him?
Oh, quickly though, I've got to, he did a little promotion too, I will too. This is I've written or produced 200 television shows. This is my only book, my only novel.
Another guest for Coast to Coast.
Right. And guess what? It's dystopian. So what would I know? Okay. But there's a much more important thing I want to remind everyone here. The only new university in the state of Texas in this century is opening in 2 weeks. Yeah. University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. I'm a professor there. Good for you. I teach screenwriting, film. I'm half the film professors, okay? But we have the only unified film department in the country, unless you want to move to Toledo. But aside from that, we're going to have 27,000 students. It's already an amazing, UTB and UTPA are already amazing institutions. We're going to join together. If you don't happen to know, if you've been, I don't know, in Dallas for the last 2 years. And I must give a shout out to my dean, Dahlia Guerra, who's sitting right over there.
Stand up, Dan.
All right. You cannot do better. If you want an education, you come to us and we can give you anything you need. All right, now to your question. Okay, Gene was at the point, I dealt with Gene early on when they first started doing the show in '87, and he was a tough man. He was tough. You know, the reason the bridge and everything else, and the way, if you watch the original series, they would talk about Mr., and you know, the language and the attitude and the language of the nomenclature of the series was from his own Navy experience in World War II. And he was a tough man. He was a survivor. By the way, he has a connection here, Mr. Goddard. He worked on The Detective. He was one of the writers on The Detective.
Who?
Gene Roddenberry.
I didn't know that.
He wrote episodes of your series.
That was the 60s. I don't remember much.
You know, but that was back in the freelance days when you never saw the writers. But yeah, he wrote several episodes of that show. He worked on Have Gun of Travel. He did a whole bunch of stuff. And then he came up with that idea. But anyway, when I was working with him, he was not in good health. And he came in 1 day a week in this beautiful cream yellow Bentley, driven by his driver. The nicest, he had gone through the wars and come back. He had taken Warp 9 past the neutral zone and come back. He was a very calm man, very happy to have the show. My prized possession of Gene Roddenberry it's hanging on my walls in my office at UTRGV, is 2 pictures of him with me standing on the bridge of the Next Generation Bridge, saying, you know, thank you for all your work, Gene Roddenberry, David. Thank you for all your work, David, Gene Roddenberry. And they're hanging on my wall. I will be leaving those to my children.
Classics.
You know, I was a fan of that show from Man Trap On, the first episode ever aired. And ironically, my mentor in LA when I first went out there was the writer of that episode, George Clinton Johnson, who's still around somehow, lives in Pacoima. And then I worked on that show, and I was a fan of that show, and I talked to him about that. And the reason I know, I'm talking about Wagon Train with Stars, he knew that show was about hope. To him, it was all about hope and adventure, redemption, second chances. Which of us don't want a second chance? Even if it's just choosing a better breakfast the next day. We all want a second chance. And he was very much motivated by that. But I will say this, at the very end of his career there, he only wanted to do stories in which you took a journey, you met God. Honestly. I mean, that's what V'ger is. There were a couple of episodes we did. The 5th Star Trek movie was always about meeting God, and he very much, I think that came from the fact he sensed his own mortality, very much. You know, he died in his doctor's office. He wasn't feeling it when he went to the doctor's office. He died in the waiting room. I'm sure it was there were other people there are saying, how are they taking care of these people? But he was a very kind, gentle man at that point. And he was very, very satisfied with what he had accomplished, and I think he should have been.
Could I add a footnote to that?
Sure can.
Only because this is a question I get a lot is Star Trek, Lost in Space, competition, and so forth. There wasn't any competition. First of all, we were on a little bit before they were, although Gene Roddenberry had the idea for Star Trek before Lost in Space was conceived. But we happened to come on the air before they did. But very simply, Star Trek is a cerebral show. It's from the head. It makes sense. Even in science fiction, it makes sense. It's there. It's all cerebral. It's beautifully done that way. It makes sense. Lost in Space doesn't make any sense. It's not supposed to make any sense. Really, it's a show from the heart. You either sit there and laugh and get a kick out of it, or, you know, a family in space. And it's it's from the heart. The other one's from the head. And ours, I think, is from that's how I always explain it. So it wasn't, there wasn't any competition at all. 2 completely different kind of science fiction shows. Thank you.
Thank you.
What I loved, I gotta tell you, I was watching, I quit the Scouts to watch Lost in Space on Wednesdays.
Should have stayed in the Scouts.
I know, no. It was a paramilitary outfit they were training us to kill. It was Dallas. It was Dallas. It was the 60s. It's very different to the Scouts today. You know, and, you know, no, I would go home and watch that show. What I really loved, although I guess later on people were writing that it was chintzy, I loved the fact that Irwin Allen, the producer, would take the same monsters from Lost in Space, the costumes, the masks, the monsters, then use them on Time Tunnel. And I loved it. I thought it was the same universe. You know, wherever they went in Time Tunnel, they were visiting the same monsters from Lost in Space. That was a great show.
It used to work the other way around, too, quickly. We were connected to Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Stage here, and then over here. Yeah. And then one day I'm out there, I used to smoke in those days, having a cigarette, you know, I'm standing out in between the 2 stages, and this guy comes out, like all the seaweed, wet seaweed. It was a monster with seaweed all down like this. You couldn't know height or anything, you know. And then out behind him comes a prop man with a hairdryer. And he blows him down, and he sends him into Lost in Space to do the next show. I said, whoa, okay, now I know how everyone's saving that buck he didn't pay me, you know?
Tom, you were on a plane a couple weeks ago right next to William Shatner.
Yeah, we were going to Vegas, and William Shatner was there.
He's quiet.
He's very quiet. The poor guy who sat in the middle seat, William was at the window. William didn't say a word to him the whole flight. The poor kid was kind of looking over. I knew he wanted to get an autograph, but he didn't ask.
I should have talked to the kid. What's the matter with him?
I don't know.
I've got a William Shatner story. I worked with him on Tech War. Does anyone remember Tech War? Yeah. Okay. And he was, I did 18 episodes on that show. I still don't know quite what we were doing, what the format was. It was one of those shot in Toronto shows. We're down in LA things. And we had a couple of meetings with him. And honestly, he didn't want to be in his own show. He had other things to do. He wanted more money, you know. And he came in, and when he would come into the room, well, when he left the room, all the air left with him. You know, he was very much a star. There was very much a kind of this energy. I mean, he always had this energy and all that. And I probably shouldn't tell this story. Is this going to go on that?
Good, tell it.
Yeah.
All right.
You probably already are.
All right. There was one story he wanted to do very, very badly. And he was very angry when we refused. That it was a story about a hitman, and his wife is pregnant. And the show was set in the future, by the way, right? A couple hundred years in the future and all that. And tech was a drug you put in your head. And, it was a mix of William Gibson and the detectives, anyway. And not the best part of either. This hitman's wife is pregnant, very, very pregnant, 8 months. She's dying of some alien malady. He then has the fetus transferred to his body. He is now a pregnant hitman. And he is about to shoot someone important. And the hero has to choose between shooting the hitman and saving the guy he's going to shoot, and or killing the fetus and the hitman. And this was not a comedy. And we said to him, look, Ivan Reitman, one of the best comic directors in the country, just did a comic version of this, Junior, with Arnold Schwarzenegger was at the height of his powers, and it didn't work. How are we going to do this as a drama? And we were all really appalled. And he said, okay, I got a better idea. There's this, someone has recovered Lincoln's brain and is going to put it into a computer and destroy the world. We actually liked that one better. But we didn't use it either. So he was fun. He was very memorable.
Are we getting creativity from writers anymore, David, for television?
Oh, are you kidding? Are you kidding? It is a golden age of TV, guys. I mean, don't watch this last season of True Detective. Watch the first season. Yeah. Walking Dead is brilliant.
Breaking Bad was
Breaking
brilliant.
Bad, genius. It is a golden age of TV. I really wish I was... When I was working in TV, it was T.J. Hooker, and I've seen the past and it works. Okay? And they were literally doing the past. I mean, every series, they did DOA and they did Laura. Okay? Everybody was doing recycling old movies deep into the 70s, deep into the 80s. It didn't change until Hill Street Blues came along. They finally started to do some exciting television. But really, it is a golden age of TV. Movies suck. Okay? If you've seen Battleship and John Carter, you know how it's a real crapshoot with the movies. Because guess why? Why are the movies really uneven? Okay, if you've seen the Fantastic Four mess, okay, why are they so uneven, and why is the television getting really, really good? Anyone want to guess?
Competition?
Technology.
The writers.
Yeah,
Who
right.
said that?
A writer?
Genius. Okay. The writers run television. It's a writers-producer medium. Directors run the movies, and they may know how to use a camera, but they don't know what a story or characters are. They know image, but they don't know story. Writers run television. Look at Vince Gilligan, the genius he did with Breaking Bad. Better Call Saul is a pale imitation of Breaking Bad, and it's still better than 9 out of 10 movies you're going to watch, minute for minute and value for value of the writing and the characters. So it's a fantastic time to watch TV, guys. When you go to the movies, it's like Vegas, and you bet on red or you bet on black. Actually, it's worse than that. It's a roulette wheel, you know. But no, it's a fantastic time for television, for creativity. They're really open to some amazing ideas.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
How would you like to have a college professor like David Carren? Wouldn't that be fun?
We have a terrific time.
That would be fun. My college professor would open up by going, Bueller. Bueller. We'd be half asleep by that time. Tom, let's take a few more questions here.
Noe, tell us one of your most astonishing things you found in your extraterrestrial research, the thing that gave you the wow factor.
I would have to say that it was our relationship with retired Air Force Colonel Robert Willingham. Ruben and I spent a lot of time in his home. In the 1950s, he was a pilot for the U.S. Air Force Reserve, and he was in a Cold War training mission where he was flying an F-86 out of Dallas-Fort Worth, and he and several other F-86s were boxing a B-52 bomber. It was a B-52. And they were headed toward El Paso when the entire convoy of planes saw this huge glowing object right in front of them. And, you know, I just want to say that subsequent to this, the Air Force took all of those aviators aside and had a briefing in which they were told never to disclose what they saw. But just Ruben and I spending time with Colonel Willingham in his home, he had been the object of much intimidation from the military anytime he tried to tell his story to anyone. And I remember Ruben, we were in his small dining room there in Archer City, Texas, just outside of Wichita Falls. And he was telling us about the incident. He was showing us his old military photos and the jet aircraft that he piloted. And every now and then he'd go over to the curtains. He'd open the curtains of his dining room and look outside to see what cars were passing by in his neighborhood. So even just a few years ago, he still had this tension and this fear because the military intelligence officers that spoke to him after the incident made it very clear to him that he was never to reveal to anyone ever what had happened to him. So he saw this, everybody in that convoy of planes, they saw this huge object which did a 90-degree angle turn going at over 2,000 miles an hour right in front of all the aviators. And it headed, they were in the approximate area of San Angelo, and it headed down south toward Del Rio. And Colonel Willingham asked permission to follow that object from his commanding officer in the bomber, and he was granted permission because everybody wanted to know what the heck they had just seen. And in the excitement of the moment, you know, Willingham was the only one that proposed going after him. So he was given permission. He broke off from the formation and followed this object. There was a contrail. You know, it was leaving a clear contrail. It was traveling at over 2,000 miles per hour and just speeding past them. And the other interesting part is before he saw the object, there was a lot of chatter on the military radar because it had been spotted way in the northwestern United States, you know, near the Canadian border. And just in a matter of a short time, it was down in Texas. So Colonel Willingham followed in his F-86 and actually saw that object crash. It came down for a crash landing just south of Langtree, Texas, not far from Del Rio. So just putting the book together, spending time with Colonel Willingham was an amazing experience for Ruben and me. And it's just so unfortunate now that he has become very ill. He had a series of strokes, and he's in a military facility, retirement, full care facility, and he's not expected to live much longer. But he told us, you know, I used to be concerned that if I spoke out, there would be retribution, which was told to me. But now he says, I'm at the point in my life where I don't really give a damn, he said. You know, I'm going to tell my story. And ours was the first book about his case that was ever written, the other Roswell. And
he was believable, too. Very believable.
Absolutely. You know, he told us the first time we met, I don't want a cent from your publishing this book or interviewing me or anything. I don't want anybody to say that I accepted any money from working on this case. And we present this case, you know, all these people come up to us and say, oh, he just did it for the money. You know, he just wants to make money. As George, I'm sure you know, there's very few people in UFO research that make any sort of money. We're lucky to cover our expenses. And a lot of times we kick in.
Was he married?
Yeah, he was married, and he told us he never told his wife or his children.
She would have told everyone right away.
No, and it was really sad because...
Thank you, Donald Trump.
It was really sad because when he had his stroke last year, the caretaker, the lady that watched over his affairs there in Archer City, Texas, was trying to give all of his old photographs and documents, military service records and medals, and he had a medal from Lyndon Baines Johnson and from Richard Nixon. He had worked in intelligence. He had worked on Project Blue Book. He was trying to give all that to his daughter, to some of his family members, and they wouldn't take it. They said, we have no interest in that. You just keep it. So the caretaker contacted Ruben and me, and we were very happy to get all of his papers and his documents.
I'm glad you documented all that. Look, they allotted us 1 hour for the panel, so we're over that. But I wanted to just ask the panelists one more quick question before we break. And don't forget to participate in all the events that are going on. We've got a meet and greet at about, 4:15 later on tonight. So come on by for that too. But let's start with you, Ruben. Very short answer, if you would. Are we being visited by extraterrestrials? Yes or no, and why?
Yes, and I have the stats to prove it. We have a MUFON database that shows how many types of visitations or sightings that are occurring throughout the world each month, each year, and we have more than 70,000 cases so far in our database.
Dr. David Bowles.
It would be cool if my name was Dr. Mark Goddard.
That's right. We'll get to him.
Yeah, possibly. There certainly is something strange going on. It certainly is quite feasible that it could be extraterrestrial in nature. It's something that we need to be a little more open-minded about and dig in and have a concerted effort to try to find out what's going on.
Now, Dr. Mark Goddard.
I'd like to explain, as Donald Trump would, that I love women. I've been married enough times to prove that fact.
Thanks.
You have a question for me?
No, that's good enough. I'm happy with that answer.
And I often think that, though. I often think, we all think that we're the center of our own universe, in a way. So I've often thought that, am I special, that I came from somewhere else and just happened to be here somehow, because I'm kind of nutty. But not that aliens are nutty. See, I said another thing I'll get my foot into. Forget it. No, I don't mean nutty. I mean, it's like different. Aliens are different, aren't they?
They are different.
Okay, good. I didn't say anything wrong. Good.
Tommy, we still want him on Coast to Coast? Hey, by the way, Mark, I do want to thank you on behalf of everybody for really the years of some great fun television that you've given us in your career.
Which I'd like to add, what he said so very well, and I mean this truthfully. Those years of the Dick Van Dyke Show and Little Detectives and all that stuff was fun. It was good and everything. But now I watch sports and I watch news programs basically now, because you do that when you get older. But I see all these shows that are being written on television, and I think to myself, these writers, this is amazing. Amazing, the creativity, and that they can come up with all these different CIS, all that stuff, all those shows. I said, I don't know how they do it. And it is right, it's the writing. It begins with the writing, and that's where it's at. And so you're very right about saying that. I like Dick Van Dyke and all that. That was fun, and it was good. But it wasn't what's going on today, which is really special. Thank you. Hey, it's great being here. You want this?
Thank you.
No, it's great being here. Thank you very much for having me. And I'll get on Coast to Coast. And I want you to listen to Coast to Coast.
Let's go to a commercial.
Yay! Okay, we're all set? You want this?
We're all set. You'll do it. David, that question. Are we alone? Yes or no, and why?
I'm married, no.
ParanormalDate.com.
I will say this, my biggest concern about My biggest issue about alien life is how quiet it is out there. Okay, when we put out the Australian data dishes are constantly scanning the skies, and they don't get anything except for the classic noise of space and subspace, of energy and radiation. They are not getting messages. They are not getting on any conceivable frequency. That's always concerned me. That, to me, whatever you say about abductions or sightings, to me the greatest evidence of alien visitation or existence would be there'd be a radio signal of some kind. There'd be television signals. There'd be some kind of communication somewhere in the universe. And that's always broken my heart. Now, I just heard, though, that the dishes in Australia have been getting a signal they cannot decipher on a frequency that they have never quite examined before. I have hope. If there is noise out there, right? I mean, if you have a family, you know that there's life in the family when there's noise, okay? And there's life in the universe when there's noise. And there's supposedly, finally, an artificial signal coming in, or a signal they can't identify as natural, as a natural sound. All the other signals they can identify as radiation, magnetic storms, magnetic patterns, whatever. I have hope. Okay, if there's just one signal out there, there should be at least one intelligent entity trying to talk to us and maybe try to see us. And hopefully they're friendly. Utopia. Okay, let's hope.
Ruben and Noe.
Well, just quickly, I just want to respond to a couple of things there. Is we're assuming that to the aliens, to the ETs, radio communications might be like sketching on the wall of a cave, you know. They don't necessarily use that technology or would use that technology. That may be extremely primitive. And number two, we're assuming that they would want to talk to us. I mean, someone capable of interstellar travel who exhibits all this amazing technology. Sometimes I want to agree with what Stanton Friedman always says. I go in my backyard, I see the squirrels, I don't want to talk to them. You know, so we have to get past the fact that, number one, would they use radio to communicate with us? I mean, to them, radio would be like playing with Legos, you know. They may not go there. And number two, would they even want to communicate to us at this point in our history? Perhaps they're studying us until we reach a certain point in our evolution. But it's very clear to me the historical evidence speaks volumes that we have been visited by these strange entities for centuries. This isn't something that began in the 40s. And one of the books that Ruben helped with and we did is called The Real Cowboys and Aliens. And that's about, we did that and it was so much fun, but it's about stories about UFO encounters in the 1800s in North America. There were metallic discs in the sky. There were strange entities that resembled the Greys. I mean, so these guys have been around for a really long time. There's very little doubt. They've left their footprints. You've got to look carefully. You've got to read between the lines. You've got to do a lot of research, but they're there all the way back to the origins of our race.
And Noe, what's on tap for the rest of the day?
Yeah, we've got fantastic. We've got David Carren coming up and speaking about the Star Wars movies.
Right after this, right?
Right after this. And this afternoon, there's going to be a fantastic presentation by Mark Goddard about his time on Lost in Space. Mark's probably going to be drawing from the new book that he's been preparing, so we're all eagerly looking. He's going to show some clips from the show. You won't want to miss that. His favorite moments in Lost in Space. And we're going to have my good friend Ruben, who brought a fantastic presentation on the UFO crash retrievals along the Texas-Mexico border we've been working on. I talked about the Willingham case. He'll touch on that. And the Mexico's Roswell case, where the mid-air collision, the soldiers from Mexico died trying to recover the UFO. Many of you are familiar with that case. So Ruben will bring that. And then after Ruben, we're going to have me. You'll have to put up with me. Ruben and I just got back from Area 51. We were invited to speak at the National Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas, Nevada, and we spoke about the history and UFO connections of Area 51. So I'm going to be bringing you that lecture, and I'm going to pull Ruben from the audience to come up and say a few words as well. And then we're all looking forward to George Noory's great meet and greet, where he connects with you guys and you interact with him to close off the day this afternoon. So nobody go away. Everybody come back and stay with us.
Let's hear it for the panelists. And stick around for David Carren's event just ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.